concerns about your image being shared, please let me know. For almost a century, Pendle Hill has been a Quaker center welcoming all for spirit-led learning, retreat, and community. We invite friends into this community in many different ways, including through our daily morning meeting for worship here in the barn and on Zoom, and through on-campus and online educational offerings, weaving together themes of faith and practice, prophetic witness, and creative exploration. You can read about our Pendle Hill offerings at pendlehill.org and in the flyers on the table outside. I now invite Francisco Burgos, our Executive Director, to introduce the Cary Lecture and welcome you to the evening.
Thank you, Francis. It is interesting. This is one of the lectures that you have several people introducing one another before the invitee came and delivered the message for us. Well, I joined Francis in welcoming you to Pendle Hill. From wherever you are welcome. And I want to remind you, as I was telling to Bruce early today, that you belong to this community. It is a real joy to welcome you here today. As we gather tonight, we remember Steve G. Cary, a friend that deeply embraced the testimony of peace by engaging in civil disobedience and service. That combination was critical for Steve. Steve responded to the social and political realities of his time with great courage and integrity, and was deeply moved by his faith as a friend that always tried to put his action as a testimony of his seeking of the divine. He was always looking for divine guidance as he was walking in this world. Steve was a person of peace. His faithful commitment to peace nurtured his 60 years of service within the American Friends Service Committee, and his strong involvement in the rebuilding of Europe after the World War II. Steve was also very key in supporting and shaping Haverford College Quaker identity, and was committed to a rigorous academic work. We at Pendle Hill are so grateful for his testimony of peace, leadership, and teaching. I want to express my deep gratitude to all of you for being with us tonight, despite the challenges of a potential storm this afternoon, and for all of you that are joining us online, because I know that it's not sometimes easy to make time in a Monday evening for a lecture, and yes, you are present with us today. At the same time, I am very grateful for the people that has supported us and has accompanied us in making this lecture possible. To all of you that for many years has been with us, this is a big thank you for my heart. I want to say that our gratitude is embedded in so deep because you have trusted and supported us as we receive and continue working for peace in many forms, and as we try to build within this 93 years old institution a testament of what can be possible in the world. It is not an easy task to work for peace in times when insane polarizations, war, violence, injustice, and inequality seem to be popular ingredients of our daily bread. It is not an easy project to build community when our participatory process and our sense of equality are diminished. However, as people of faith, we must engage in the transformation of our society. And we must stand for justice and love as special steps toward building and nurturing the beloved community. Today, Barbara was reminding me something at lunch. Today, I cannot ignore the events that happened in 9/11, as they are strong memories of our need for peace. And if you notice, I am talking in plural. What happened 50 years ago in Chile and 22 years ago in New York City somehow represent our failure in promoting policies that are grounded in peace and justice. And as I welcome you tonight, I want to remain hopeful that together we can walk humbly with God as we envision and contribute to a better world. This is part of the mission that we have embraced for the past 93 years as a small Quaker institution. And I know that in your companionship, we can continue expanding our commitment to peace with hope and creativity. It's not for me to be delivering a lecture. So now I would like to invite my friend, Barbara Price Monahan, our Interim Director of Development, who will introduce our Carey lecture for the fiscal year 2024. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Price Monahan, and for another 4 days, I'm the interim director of advancement at Pendle Hill, after which I will pass the torch to my successor, Jeff Semsky, who is here tonight, and then happily return to full-time retirement. On behalf of the entire Pendle Hill staff and the board, I'd like to welcome you to the 2023 Stephen G. Carey Lecture and introduce you to our speaker, Bridget Moix. I asked Francisco if I could introduce Bridget because for most of my 7 years at FCNL as a staff member, I had the privilege of working with her. Bridget has a long history with FCNL, first as a legislative intern for Joe Volk, FCNL's third General Secretary, who also joins us this evening, and later as Senior Legislative Secretary. While in that role, Bridget developed FCNL's Peaceful Prevention of Deadly Conflict program and co-founded the Prevention and Protection Working Group, a coalition of more than 250 human rights, religious, humanitarian, anti-genocide, and peace organizations that continues to this day. In 2012, Bridget left FCNL to pursue a PhD from the School for Conflict Analysis and Resolution at George Mason University, but came back to FCNL as a volunteer. She was assistant clerk and then clerk of FCNL's General Committee from 2016 to 2020 after completing her doctorate. In her role as clerk, she made FCNL's diversity, equity, and inclusion work a priority while continuing her personal journey with race and racism. At the same time, she was heavily involved in clerking FCNL. She was the U.S. Executive Director for Peace Direct in Washington, D.C., an organization that facilitates opportunities for local peace builders from conflict-affected countries to meet with policymakers and key stakeholders in the UN and the U.S. government. In 2022, Bridget was named General Secretary of FCNL, succeeding Diane Randall. In that position, Bridget leads 3 affiliated organizations: Friends Committee on National Legislation, Friends Place on Capitol Hill, and the FCNL Education Fund. While serving primarily as an ambassador for FCNL and its vision, Bridget also ensures that all aspects of the organization are sustained and nourished, supporting a full legislative agenda based on the regular discernment of more than 200 Quaker meetings and churches around the country. Bridget oversees a staff of 68, 3 buildings on Capitol Hill, and a combined annual budget of $11 million. She and her team are in the process of discerning FCNL's next 5-year strategic plan. As an executive, Bridget has also served other Quaker entities, including Casa de los Amigos in Mexico City, the Quaker United Nations office in New York, and the Quaker Peace Center in Cape Town, South Africa. Her resume as a teacher, writer, and speaker is also extensive. As a teacher, she's taught courses in peace building, conflict resolution, Quaker studies at several institutions, including Haverford College, Columbia University, George Washington University, American University, and Eastern Mennonite University. She is the author of Choosing Peace, Agency and Action in the Midst of War, and a contributing author to Building Peace in America and the Handbook of Conflict Resolution, Theory and Practice. She's also a regular writer for the Religious News Service. As a speaker, Bridget has given lectures and keynotes at several yearly meetings, including delivering the Cary Lecture, that's Cary with an E, for Baltimore Yearly Meeting. She's a member of Friends Meeting of Washington. Next week, Bridget will join an interfaith delegation in New York for a second meeting with President Raisi of Iran, building on FCNL's long legacy of peace building with Iran that began during Joe Volk's tenure. I'm honored to introduce Bridget Moix to you and to welcome her as our Stephen G. Carey Lecturer for 2023. You're in for a very enlightening and thought-provoking talk by a Quaker who is deeply committed to advancing U.S. policy for a more just, peaceful, and sustainable world. Let us share a few minutes to center into silence, out of which Bridget will speak.
Thank you, friends. Good evening. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Barbara. Thank you for the introduction, Francisco. Thank you for the introduction, Francis. I have to say, I'm really tempted to just introduce someone else to give this lecture. But I won't. I'm so grateful to be here and feel so blessed to be with you and to be in this new space and way of being together with so many people in the room and online, this expansive, inclusive way that we gather now. It's really quite remarkable, isn't it? The joys that come out of struggles as well. Thanks to Pendle Hill for this invitation, and also to Mary Comfort for serving as elder this evening. And to everyone for taking some time out of an evening. You could be doing a lot of other things, and you're here for this. And I'm really grateful and appreciative and excited to see where the conversation goes. I will give 2 disclaimers to start. One, I don't do lectures. Even as a teacher, lectures were not my style. And when I received the invitation, I thought, oh boy, a lecture. It sounds so intimidating. But I know I'm among friends and that we'll have a conversation. And the second disclaimer is that in the blurb, I went back when I was preparing and I looked at this little paragraph that I gave to Francisco for advertising. And it has these very lofty, deep queries. You know, how do we remain faithful in the midst of great division and strife? How do we solve the world's problems? I'm not going to answer any of those questions tonight. So just to make sure, you know. But I am very grateful to be here. And just to kick off, I want to also say thank you. We can start the slides maybe. Thank you from all of FCNL, from all of our staff and our governors and our advocates in our community. We really cannot do the work that we do without everyone who is part of it. And that is many people in this room, many people online. We have advocates all around the country lobbying for us. We have supporters who provide financial support every month or every year, or even in their wills beyond their own lifetime. We have governors and committee members who give hours and days and weeks of their service each year to us. So thank you so much for making FCNL what it is and our work possible. And this is a picture of our staff recently. So I want to bring you their greetings and appreciation. So I'm really honored to be asked to give a lecture in the name of someone who is very influential for my own life, Steve Cary and his Witness for Peace. And I'm sure many people in this room have read his book, but if you have not, I highly recommend it. It was influential in my own journey in Quaker peace work. His life and the testimony of his life and service in World War II spoke to me in 9/11, in the experience of 9/11, which shaped my life 22 years ago, and thinking about how do we respond in the midst of violence? What other alternative responses can we have? And the witness of Steve and so many others, that there is always an alternative, that war is not the answer, has shaped so much of my own life and of many other people's. And I met Steve only once at FCNL's annual meeting. I was trying to remember with Joe what year it was. I think it was somewhere around 2001, because 9/11 was in my mind about it. And I remember Steve, the other thing that Steve brought to this very difficult work of trying to build a more peaceful, just world is joy. And I just remember him coming up to me. Who am I? I was nobody. I was some young lobbyist at FCNL. He didn't know who I was, but I went to shake his hand and just say thank you to him afterwards. And I just remember he embraced me with joy and encouragement. And I think he did that for everyone that he met. And one of his, as I was thinking about this lecture, I was also thinking about the history and the shoulders that we all stand on. FCNL is celebrating its 80th year this year. And in 1943, when FCNL was being founded by a small group of Quakers, ordinary Midwestern folk coming together in Indiana to say, we should have a voice for peace on Capitol Hill in the midst of World War II. At that time, Steve was in civilian service in World War II. He was a conscientious objector, serving in civilian work camps because his conscience wouldn't allow him to fight, and insisted he find another way to serve. And in describing his own experience of civilian public service and Quaker war relief work, he said that out of that crucible of the direct experience of war and its realities and seeking other ways to respond, came people who really knew why they were pacifists. It was the experience of struggle that was transformative and grounding for finding his way into peace work and for so many others. And FCNL, as an 80-year-old Quaker witness in Washington and all around the country, also works uphill for peace and does so persistently. Wilson has this quote, which I go to all the time when I get frustrated with Congress or think, how do I keep going? That is still so relevant for our world right now. Why try to work uphill for peace, justice, and freedom on Capitol Hill at a time when cynicism about the churches and operation of government and government officials is widespread, and when disillusionment about the church and organized religion is so common and so vocal? Because religion should be vital and relevant, and because the health of our democracy rests upon responsible participation by informed and concerned citizens. That is so relevant for our world and our work right now, today. So as we are gathering here this evening, I have been thinking about the crucible out of which we are continuing to be formed and the hills that we're continuing to try to climb against war, violence, and oppression. And so I titled this talk, Forging the Beloved Community with Friends, a Journey Through the Refiner's Fire. And I did so because I do believe that we're in the midst of a remarkable, challenging, and vital time of transformation in our world and in our society of friends. I became intrigued by the work of Marcel Martin during the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement and the racial reckoning that is ongoing in our country. And she's a Quaker theologian and historian. You may know her work. She looked back at early friends and how they understood their experience of the Spirit. And they talked about the refiner's fire and being in the midst of the refiner's fire, of how the great light would expose them, expose their own flaws, expose their own complicity with the challenges and problems of the world, and then help transform them, mold them through that crucible transformative experience, through that experience of the refiner's fire. And so I think now we are in the midst of that kind of forging again. What will be forged in us and through us from today's crucible? What is the great refiner's fire exposing in us, and how can it transform us and our world to new possibilities? Facing the troubles of the world from these shoes at FCNL now, I'm continually aware of all those shoulders that we stand on. And so before going further, I just want to take a pause and a breath with all of you and just think about all those who've influenced your own journey, who've brought you here tonight, upon whose shoulders you feel that you stand as well. So I was thinking about what the topic was for this evening. What is the core message? You're going to give a talk to an audience. You could say a lot of things, but what is the core of the message? And I was listening for spirit over months and months, and I thought, well, I think it's just about one thing: change. It's just about change. And so I was thinking about what that change is and starting to write. And then I was having this conversation with some friends about the talk, and that I was thinking about, what should I write and what should I be inspired by? And somehow spirit animals came up. And I realized I didn't even know what my spirit animal was. So I did what we do now. I went to the internet, and you can take a test, friends, to determine your spirit animal. I encourage you to do it. It was quite fun. I think there might only be 5 to 7 answers that actually come out, but it was fun. And I did the little test. Here I was planning this talk, and it came out this beautiful butterfly, an image of a butterfly. My spirit animal was a butterfly. Couldn't be more perfect, right? And this is what it said in the little description. It said, always linked to the positive, the butterfly spirit animal has many characteristics. It represents joy, grace, and perseverance. It makes the most beautiful projects and wildest ambitions come true, giving us the courage to face trials and difficulties with optimism and to overcome them. And now you've heard we're going through strategic planning at FCNL. So I thought, well, that really is perfect, right? So I was feeling very good about this spirit animal butterfly metaphor and how I was going to work this into the talk. And then I kept reading, and a little further down, it went on. And it said, if you see the butterfly as your totem or spirit animal, pay attention to the areas in your life or personality that are in need of profound change or transformation. And I thought, oh, that wasn't quite what I was hoping for, because I'm supposed to have the answers to the queries, right? We're Quakers. We're supposed to know how to do the peace work. We're building on centuries of justice and peace work from those who came before us. We should be this butterfly already. What should we have to change? But actually, I think that we are probably more like this. At least I know I am. We are somewhere in this process because butterflies don't just appear. They begin as caterpillars and they go through this remarkable, probably not very comfortable, transformative process. And so I thought, gosh, in change, I'm not the butterfly, I'm somewhere in here. And somewhere in here are probably most of our meetings and churches and organizations going through a lot of struggles and change. And certainly our country and our world are in this mix. The butterfly's out there still, but we're somewhere in here probably. And then I heard a story on NPR about change and about how people respond to change. And basically, scientists have discovered there are two kinds of people in the world: people who like change, people who don't like change. And a lot of our differences in politics, in ways that we live our lives, come down to whether you lean towards change or you lean away from it. Now, I like to think that I like change. I've always been drawn to movement and things that are different. But really, when it comes to myself, am I really that ready to change? Now, Susan Beaumont is another theologian, and she's been talking about the great change that we're in. And she talks about that change as a liminal space in our world. We are in the midst of so much change from our environment, from our political system, from the ways our communities organize, from institutions like the church, which are undergoing great change, from, even in our own meetings. And we don't see the butterfly yet. We don't know what's coming yet. We're in that foggy walk. And regardless of how we characterize this epic, she says, one thing is clear. We're in this transformation. Some new ways are emerging, but we don't yet know what's next. We don't know the order that's coming. And what she advises that's really hard to do is that in that liminal time, we don't try to rush forward and we don't try to run back. And even working in Congress, we see this. We see members of Congress, advocates, others who work with us, myself often, rushing to get to the change. Let's just get to the butterfly. Let's just get there. And we see others who don't want to change anything. They're scared. Let's go back. But actually, we need to be in the space of the unknown. We need to be in the space of the change and to hold that space for others. Our environment, our institutions, our social and political systems are all in upheaval. We see it every day in the headlines and in our own lives. The job of Friends Witness in Washington is to minister within this space of change for the world we seek, and to find practical step-by-step ways to advance national policy toward that world. This is FCNL's vision statement. I hope you're familiar with it. We seek a world free of war and the threat of war. We seek a society with equity and justice for all. We seek a community where every person's potential may be fulfilled. We seek an earth restored. But that world feels really far away sometimes, doesn't it? Right now, thinking about all the problems in our world can be overwhelming. It often is. When I go to work, just opening my emails, I have to sort of brace myself. What's going to be in there? Climate change, environmental crisis, war and violent conflict. There are more wars and violent conflicts right now than there were since World War II. Forced migration, xenophobia, racism, and white supremacy we're grappling with, economic inequality at levels we haven't seen and that keep getting worse in the world. Gun violence in our own country that is at levels similar to or more than some war zones around the country. And hate crimes and anti-LGBTQ+ and other oppressions on a nearly a daily basis, it feels. Obviously, we just came out of a pandemic, which still is lingering and could come back. So much uncertainty in our world and so much division in our country. There was a recent poll by the University of Chicago that found that increasing numbers of people on both the right and the left believe violence may be justified to advance political issues that they believe in. That's scary. White extremist groups pose the greatest threat to the U.S., according to the U.S. government. Partisan polarization, you feel it in your communities, I'm sure. We feel it in Washington every day, making things grind to a halt in Congress. I mean, they weren't moving fast before, folks. Making it more and more difficult to even talk to one another. We had a congressional office say to us when we posed the question to them, what can FCNL do to try to help reduce political polarization? You know, how do we help bridge divisions? We've always been nonpartisan. We've always worked across the aisle. They said, we don't know, we're not sure what to do, but we really hope you can help, because it used to be that we had different positions on issues, but now we have different facts. We have different truths. We don't know how to talk to one another. We have different narratives, different media. We're operating in entirely different realities, almost, it feels. This is typical of divided societies, post-war, pre-war. And most difficult is that we don't see a path out. We're all sort of just sticking with our side. It's too hard. It's too hard to have those conversations. And then within our own religious society of Friends, we are struggling, friends. Numbers are diminishing. Many meetings are just struggling to survive. There are divisions and splits in yearly meetings. We continue to be, in the United States, at least, predominantly aging and white. Many young people are rejecting and pushing back the traditions and ways of working and business that we've traditionally carried out. And we're confronting our own past and present collusion with systems of oppression and violence. Just to go into a particular issue that I'm sure many of your meetings have perhaps been talking about. I hope some of you are familiar with Paula Palmer's remarkable work, very important work. We had a Quaker Changemaker event with her and others this past year about the role of Quakers in Indian boarding schools. So this is a collaboration between the federal government and Christian churches, including Quakers, dating to the 19th and 20th century, in which hundreds of Native children were forced forcibly removed from their families, or the families were impressed upon to turn their children over to boarding schools and with forced assimilation, cultural genocide, really. And you may have seen the news recently, they had 408. The number before was 408 boarding schools that they had found. The US government, led by Secretary Deb Haaland, has been doing an intensive study of the boarding schools era, and they just recently found 118 more boarding schools that they hadn't known about. So we're up to 523. There's probably more. 37 states and territories had these schools. We know that at least 30 of these schools were run by Friends. Paula Palmer does a deep historical analysis of this. Many Quaker meetings are opening their archives, really important work of opening their archives. FCNL has been collecting minutes and communications from meetings that have been looking at their relationship with boarding schools in the past. And this is a very difficult reckoning, but it's critically important. One of FCNL's priority legislative issues is lobbying for legislation to establish the first Truth and Healing Commission on boarding school policies in the US. This was just, it was introduced last Congress in House and Senate and had strong bipartisan support and has just been reintroduced in the Senate recently. We're hoping for House reintroduction. And this work is so important to me and to all of us. But for me, with a background in peace building, thinking about, first of all, how difficult it can be for us to face this picture and think about the fact that Quakers were involved in this, and how important that is for our own communities and for our country and for writing relationships. And thinking of the refiner's fire possibility of transformation. If we could reckon with just this small piece of our country's history, just this small window, and say, yes, we will tell the truth and we will seek a path to healing and accountability. Couldn't we open that even further then to more of our country's history, more of the systems of oppression that we need to undo? And if Quakers can be part of that and reckon with our own role, what a stronger community that would make us. And what an important step to better relationship with Native communities. So Valerie Kerr is one of my favorite writers recently, and she does such beautiful work in helping us reimagine darkness, reimagine difficulty. And she talks about thinking of that difficult, dark time you may be in, not as the tomb, but as the womb. And what if that's what we're in? What if that is what we're in, that crucible, that refiner's fire, that cocoon, that womb is what our country is in right now, what our community of friends is in right now, what each one of us is in. And what if all of the generations before us, she says, are whispering in our ear, you are brave? What if this is our nation's greatest transition? So we were at the FCNL Strategic Planning Retreat just this past week. It was wonderfully successful. We're going to have a fabulous plan. You're going to love it. Mostly because it was a really remarkable group of people brought together, including some folks here. And in the midst of it, someone, it might have been Francisco, said, we need to lean into the areas of discomfort because that's where our leadership is needed. And I really think about Quakers' ability and history and witness in doing that, in being in that uncomfortable place and knowing that it leads to our growth. I had a friend write recently to me and say, you know, I hate when I see these articles in the news about the Indian boarding schools, and it says Quakers ran some of these schools. And I said, yeah, that is very hard. It's painful to see that. But I have also found I am now, I don't want to use the word proud, but I am encouraged, humbled, and I feel a blessing when I see Quakers publicly saying, yes, let's tell the truth. And I've been in meetings. We met with a congressional staff person on the committee with other faith leaders. And I had people afterwards, and I figure it's part of my job. I need to, in those meetings, talk about why we need to pass this legislation, because it's part of our accountability too. And afterwards, I had colleagues from other faith groups who were involved in boarding schools say, our community isn't ready to do this yet. Our community is not, they're not looking at the history really. So I think that being public, even when it's painful about that, and being in those places of discomfort, it can feel like, aren't we tainting that Quaker history? The myth of their beautiful relationship with Native communities. No, there was a lot of good and there was a lot of harm, and we can hold those things together. That is how we will grow. So, after all that heaviness, I do bring good news, friends. And the good news is that we are fully equipped to be in this liminal space, to be in this transformative fire, and to do this work together. Because Quakerism, our Quaker faith, is all about this. It is preparing us for every step of the way. We're made for this time. 5 ways I think Quakerism prepares us for the journey through the refiner's fire. First, our faith calls us to live with integrity and to persevere with integrity. I first knew Friends existed even during an internship with the American Friends Service Committee, not far from here in Philadelphia, in college. And I'd grown up Catholic. I hadn't known Quakers were around. I had all the typical buggies and, mythology in my head. And I discovered, whoa, there is this group of people in the world that believes in their faith so much that they're going to try to live it every day in all their actions in the world. And that was remarkable to me. I was blown away. So we have such a deep commitment in our faith to trying. We don't do it all the time. We fail. I fail constantly. But to try to live with that integrity. And that means seeing the good and the bad. I have 2 sons, Pablo and Santiago, and they're teenagers now. But when they were little, Pablo was about 6 years old. Santi was 3. And all Pablo wanted was to be a superhero. And all he talked about all day was being a superhero. And the Quaker mom in me, who thought she was being a good Quaker mom, couldn't take it. And I thought, I'm just going to have to teach this child that that's not how the world works. There aren't good guys and bad guys, and there's not superheroes who come, fix it all up. And so I told him that one day, and I explained to my 6-year-old that there were not superheroes and there's not good and bad. And, some people we're good sometimes and we're bad sometimes, and it's all mixed together, and you're going to have to see the world a different way. And he burst into tears. Of course. And so I, of course, then felt horrible and thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? And he looked at me and he said, but Mom, all I ever wanted was to be a superhero. And I realized my attempt to be a good Quaker mom, to follow what I thought was the Quaker way, had completely failed. I had broken this child's heart. And afterwards, my 3-year-old Santi came to me and said, Mom, I think I understood what you were saying. You were saying that sometimes people do good things and sometimes they do bad things, and that's okay. That's all of us. And I said, yes, you got it. This is the child. He got it. And then he said, like you, Mom. And I said, yep, like me. But living with integrity means living with the good and the bad and working for greater accountability. Number 2, Quakerism calls us to seek the divine in everyone. Everyone. Sounds great. Love thy neighbor, no exceptions. We have that sign. We use it a lot. But can we really do that? When we think about that neighbor that drives us crazy, that person from a different political party who we really disagree with on everything, that president who did really awful things, can we really continue to seek the divine? I always say, I'm really glad it says seek the divine, because I fail all the time to find it, but we're called to keep seeking it. At FCNL, in the midst of the political partisanship that's taken over Congress, this has become such an important grounding part of our work. How do we create that space where people can hear each other again, where we can work in a way across out of the context of party politics to actually understand people as people? We have new values that we're shaping for our strategic plan. And the first one we've named is radical love. Radical love. Can we bring radical love into our political system? Can we do that? A third way that Quakerism prepares us for the time of transformation that we're in is to be truth tellers, and I like to say now, truth listeners, which can actually be harder. It can be easier to tell that truth we believe in deeply to our members of Congress or our neighbors or our family members or those we want to hear, those in power. Can we also be truth listeners and hear the difficult truths about ourselves? I think that we can. I think that deep listening is a skill that Quakerism teaches. Sitting expectantly, waiting for collective truth to emerge. Not many people do that anymore. Quakers have a practice which allows us to be prepared for the kind of conversations and change that we need to be making in our political system and in our world right now. A fourth way that I find Quakerism grounds me in the transformation we need to make is that it teaches us to embrace diversity, to pursue peace, and to act for justice, and to understand that all those things are connected. I was drawn to Quakerism very much by the peace testimony and by work. I've had the remarkable privilege and joy to be involved and connected with a lot of different Quaker peace work. And that's always been sort of what I thought of as, my tie to Quakerism. And then during the racial reckoning following the murder of George Floyd in this country, I found myself in one of the protests in Washington, D.C., led by this remarkable group of young, Black, nonviolent activists who were leading protests around D.C. And we were in front of the Capitol, and they were doing a really creative, amazing protests. And I was on the ground. They had everybody lay down on the ground. And I was on the ground face down and just had this realization that I just needed to do whatever they told me to do. That whatever I thought I had done as a privileged white woman doing Quaker peace work for years didn't matter. I need to do whatever these young people who had lived systems of oppression and injustice way more than me asked me to do in that moment. And I realized that was living the peace testimony. That we don't separate our work for justice from our work for peace. We know those are connected, and thinking about how do we then live that every day in the work that we do at FCNL. We're doing a lot of work around anti-racism, anti-bias, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. And it's hard work, but it is absolutely part of living our peace testimony, part of living our integrity, part of living our commitments to equality. It's fundamentally intertwined with all of our faith and testimonies. And the work of becoming a more diverse, inclusive, and equitable and just community as friends is the work of becoming more Quaker. I have felt some discordance, a sense of people saying, well, but if we change, if we become more diverse, or we look different, or we change the ways that we do things, are we going to lose our Quakerism? We're going to lose something of who we are. No, we are going to become more Quaker. We're going to become more of what our faith calls us to be if we can live into that embrace of diversity, pursuit of peace, and action for justice. And finally, and I think really fundamentally for me in thinking about how do we live in a time of so much change and being called to such challenging change, I was drawn to Quakerism because it's all about change. It's the only constant we have is that we know we have to remain open to change, to way opening, to continuing revelation. Growing up Catholic, where I grew up Catholic, I was given answers. I was told, this is how it is. This is what you believe. I had so many questions. They didn't have answers for me. And then I found Quakers. I was like, oh my gosh, you're all about questions. I love this. You're all about truth emerging, and maybe it will change because maybe we'll have new insights that will come from different people and new ways of doing things. There's a new document out by the Quakers Uprooting Racism group, which I know some folks are part of and is doing such good work on racial wounding and racial justice in Quaker communities. It's starting to circulate among yearly meetings, I think, and I hope people will utilize it. We're looking at how we can use it at FCNL. And it takes some of the manifestations of white supremacy, things like conflict avoidance and guardians of the status quo and denying that oppression exists and being performative. It takes these and it says, well, in Quakerism, where do we see these showing up? Because they do, because we're all swimming in this muck. And then in Quakerism, what tools do we have or ways of being or testimonies do we have that can help us undo this? So there's so much good work going on to live into this continuing revelation. And I know that for the folks who are part of that work of uprooting racism in our in Society of Friends, it's not easy. And so I just want to give deep gratitude for that work and lift it up and hope that many people will use it. And happy to talk more about it later. So I was also thinking about, well, gosh, how do we go on this journey through the refiner's fire? And I had been on a hike over the summer. So I had all these travel tips that were coming to me. And I think these travel tips are reminders for me when it gets exhausting. And Susan Beaumont talks about the fact that we're kind of all exhausted from this work. And that's okay. It's all right. You can take a break. But we can also think about how do we make the commitments to that path and take a step-by-step approach? How do we reflect on ourselves first and our own journey? How do we travel with companions? That's very important. And how do we watch for the signs of which path to take? helping others along the way, resting when you need it, being open to new sights and transforming experiences, and celebrating when way opens. And I find that this is also very much how at FCNL, these are tips we could apply to our approach to lobbying and to being advocates together for the change we want to see in the world. Because to transform the world, we will need to, and we will transform ourselves. And that's an amazing opportunity. I just always include this quote in every talk that I give because it's so good. It's a wonderful reminder from Thomas Merton. You do not need to know precisely what is happening or exactly where it is all going. What you need is to recognize the possibilities and challenges offered by the present moment and to embrace them with courage, faith, and hope. And Valerie Kerr also talks about birthing the beloved community by becoming the beloved community. I truly believe that we cannot build the world that we seek if we don't first open ourselves up to all its possibilities and all the change that it will require of us. And she talks about thinking about this critical mass of people around the nation and world who are being led with love. We like to think about it as advocacy team by advocacy team for FCNL. But imagine what institutions we could build and what stories we'll tell and what world we can birth by leading with love. So I want to get practical for a moment because we like to do that at FCNL, prophetic and practical, and invite you to be part of some of the things that are coming up with FCNL on our journey. First of all, September 21st is International Peace Day, and we're having a webinar on nonviolent responses to end the war in Ukraine. I wish we could invite Steve Cary to speak at this event, but I bet his spirit will be present. And September 30th is Orange Shirt Day, which is honoring and remembering our Indian boarding schools. So it's a great time to lobby for the Truth and Healing Commission legislation. And if you watch FCNL materials, there'll be lots of information on how to do that. And then I very much want to invite everyone to our annual meeting in Quaker Public Policy Institute, which will happen November 15th to 19th in Washington and online. And our theme this year is Justice Calls Us, Love Unites Us, which I think is a wonderful theme. Thank you to our annual meeting planning committee for coming up with that. And I just want to close with queries and one more quote, and then ask that we settle into a bit of quiet together. Feel free to speak out of the silence if you'd like to. I will hold that space for a little bit, and then I'll close it and we can have more of a Q&A and discussion. But I would love, since I, as I promised, didn't give you any answers to the queries for this event, I want to pose more queries and invite you to offer reflections as well. What crucible do we find ourselves in today? In our own lives, our communities, our world? Where am I called in the journey through the refiner's fire? How do I allow myself to embrace its discomfort and its possibilities? How are we as friends called to transform ourselves so we can help transform the world? Hold those in your mind for a moment. And then I'll just close with a story from my 9/11 experience and just after. And this beautiful quote from Steve Cary. after 9/11, there was a gathering called of friends and sort of how do friends respond? And I was working at FCNL at the time. I think I was just back as a young lobbyist. And I got an invitation to come be a young voice at this conference. And they told me, don't prepare anything. I thought, seriously? Don't prepare anything? Don't prepare anything. We want you to listen to what rises out of this conference. And then there'll be a closing panel at the end. Was anybody at this conference? It was in, I want to say, North Carolina. So I went and I was on this panel at the end, and there was a lot rising through that conference. And at the end, then they put me at the last person. I was this panel, I was young, and I was the last person wrapping up like 2 or 3 days of this deep listening, discerning, speaking. And I had some things to say, and then I didn't know how I was going to close. And I just scribbled on a piece of paper at the end, the last minute, in big letters, hope. I didn't know what I was going to do. I don't know if I was hoping that I would come up with something, but that was what I put on the piece of paper. And so I went up and I still didn't know what I was really going to say at the end of the talk. And I looked out and I saw a mentor of mine, David Jackman, who some people may know. He had worked at CUNA for many years. And I had been with him on 9/11 because we had been at Quaker House first at the Quaker Union office, and then we went to Quaker House. And I saw David Jackman, and I saw him in the audience, this big gathering of friends, and he was crying. And it just made me realize that we were all just beautiful, flawed, hopeful, tear-filled human beings on this journey together. And it gave me incredible hope. And as Steve Cary said, every great change in expanding the dimensions of human freedom has come from very small, original beginnings. Thank you, friends.
one of the gifts for me tonight is the metaphor of the womb.
One of the gifts for me tonight is the metaphor of the womb. And thinking of the darkness that surrounds us is not as the darkness of the tomb, but as the darkness of the womb. I think change begins when we are first able to welcome life on its own terms. Welcome life on its own terms. And then ask, how can we transform what we have? Not ruining it, not rejecting it, but welcoming it, and then asking, how can we transform what needs to change? It's in the womb that new life happens. It's in the womb that transformation happens. It's in the womb that new things can happen. Thank you for that metaphor.
I'm struck by the sense of not only speaking truth, but listening to truth. That can be more difficult.
In recent years, I've had many opportunities to realize how I'm now a older friend. And I've had some particular since becoming involved a year and a half ago with what we call the Quaker Call, or the Urgent Call, the Religious Society of Friends, which we focused in particular on the terrible challenges, risks to our democracy. And in working on that, I have been challenged and corrected so many times, particularly by younger friends and by friends of color. Reminded how in so many tragic ways our democracy has never been what it should have been. One of the things that I've been inspired by in terms of the work of FCNL is that there are many ways that you have, that the organization has involved young people in this work. And I'd be interested, Bridget, if you have any reflections on the role of younger people, things that some of us really old people ought to know about in terms of the change that we seek. Thanks.
Thank you. That was a good transition to maybe some more dialogue and questions if people have them. Yes. So we have an amazing young adult program, and I am an alumni of the FCNL Young Adult Program. And so it's very dear to my heart. I wouldn't have done all the work and had all the opportunities that I've had, or be working at FCNL now, or be a Quaker, if it weren't for my experience with FCNL as a young adult. And if you look at our organization now, the young adult program is thriving in bringing in diverse young people from all across the country, all different backgrounds, some Quaker, but many not Quaker, but people who share the action, the values, the core of what we're doing and are drawn to it. And it's very different than the older side of our organization. It looks different. It acts different. It does things differently. And what we're trying to do now, and talked a lot in the strategic plan, is that it's not that we want one or the other. We want generational experience has so much potential to share across. And young people, I will say now, there is just an expectation, at least in Washington where we work and the young people we bring together, of diversity, of inclusion, and of justice being at the core of the work that my own kids, Quaker meeting and Quaker camp and Quaker spaces are the whitest spaces they go to. And I've, kind of felt that sort of, whoa, and they're half Mexican. So it's very, it feels like this is so strange for them to be in a space that seems so different from what they're growing up in, because the demographic trends, folks, they are for diversity. And so having a commitment to that is really important, and having that practice and the space for people to feel they belong from many different walks of life is really important for young people, and just almost sort of an expectation. I don't think it's new that young people are on the side of change, that want to move, really, want to push things forward. And thank goodness, right? And thank goodness that we have people who have a lot of wisdom and experience and time, that they've lived this work to balance. I saw a talk by Parker Palmer at a leadership conference, a Quaker leadership conference a few months ago. And he talked about balancing the fierce urgency of now and the wisdom of generations. And that's what I think when I think about the young adult program at FCNL and the work of engaging young people. First of all, it is that they're leaders now, that it's not about them without them, for sure. And that, it is about, having this intergenerational approach, I think, is where I find a lot of excitement in our work. Other questions? We have a few more minutes, I think. What's our time like, Francis? Don't let me run over.
We'll wrap up a couple minutes before 9 to allow Francisco to give a closing goodbye. And in our ongoing experiment and spiritual learning community, we're always experimenting with new ways to include our friends online. So we're inviting friends online to send in questions by chat. Do we have any that have come in yet? Not yet. Okay, so friends online, please don't hesitate to send in a question by chat to Anna Hill, and she will send your question to us and we'll ask it in the room. But in the meantime, if there are any questions in the room. Oh, we do have one online.
I think this was from the moment of silence and not quite a question. But this note is from Lauren Brownlee. Thank you for helping us to consider the inspiration around us in a spirit of continuing revelation. I offer that Indigenous communities have requested that non-Indigenous friends find new language for spirit animals based not the particular sacred significance of that term in some cultures. Some suggested alternatives are Patronus, Muse, or Inspiration. Their quizzes online with some of the updated language as well.
Thank you, Lauren. Lauren is always helping us learn and grow. I appreciate that. Apologies for using inappropriate language.
Thank you so much. Other questions in the room?
I'm wondering about the pain threshold in DC. Of all the tumult and polarization, thinking of my own self, when my knee starts hurting too much, I do the exercise that the doctor gave me, and so I'm wondering, are people inclined toward sitting in spaces and doing some of this listening and this non-polarized, just taking the temperature?
Yeah, great question. So I think you would be surprised, I am surprised, at how much people in Washington and congressional offices are doing work together, bipartisan still. It's often behind the scenes or on particular issues where they can find something to work on, but there is a desire to get things done still by a lot of people and to work across the aisle. And you have, in this Congress, you have to have some work get legislation passed to get anything done. So there is work that's going, and there is a desire for it. I certainly have heard from congressional offices and members of Congress. What the problem is that there is a base, public base, and a social media driven base that's about clicks. And what gets clicks is conflict and division. And what makes the news is polarization and division. So there's a real need to try to create more space that members of Congress get rewarded, thanked, encouraged to work with their colleagues from all parties from a nonpartisan approach for FCNL. So we're really emphasizing we're not just a bipartisan organization. We're a nonpartisan organization. We come to these issues from our faith and not from a party politics. And that is so welcomed because all members of Congress and congressional offices are hearing and getting is that divisive pull from the media and from the party politics that are happening around them. So there is a desire for it. And I think it's one of the things FCNL is really thinking about. How do we help create more spaces like that? But we work across the aisle regularly. So it's the media is part of the problem in terms of, but it's, the division is also real, but the media reinforces it and makes it harder then to work together.
A more practical follow-up question. What should we be reading in terms of news, given what you've just said? Are you, do you have any tips for helpful news outlets or quasi-news outlets? Go
to the FCNL website. Do look at FCNL news and information. We have a weekly world in the world email that's really helpful, roundup each week. It's funny because on news, even my kids, so I listen to NPR, I think, oh, that's balanced, it's neutral. My kids are like, that's one-sided news, mom, So it's like, it's very hard we do operate in our bubbles. What I would say is, I think it's actually good to go check out different news to know what is being said in different spaces. Form your own opinions and about things, and follow sources that you trust to be informative and truthful. But it's not a bad do, because when we go to talk to people who are listening to something very different than what we listen to, it's good to know what have they been hearing. So, I still read traditional, news, New York Times, Washington Post, NPR. I'm more of a traditionalist in that way, but yeah, I think there's a lot of other news sources, and FCNL does a good job of trying to gather some of the most, in terms of policy work and things that are happening in Congress. It is a good source.
I think we have time for one more question from online.
What things can we do to move change in organizations, especially with people who want to hold onto the status quo?
Great question. I think it's just part of the ongoing work of, again, I think what I find helpful, because I do, when I get frustrated when I feel there's resistance to change from where I am, but trying to understand where someone else is, and then think about, okay, how do I back myself up and listen, and then try to speak to them where they are as opposed to where I am. And that isn't always easy, but I think it's what we need to do more of. I think there's a big role, for instance, for white friends to talk to other white friends, white Quakers and white Quakers, to try to help move us together. We can't rely on people of color and those who've been, oppressed to teach us or lead us or guide the way. We have to do this work ourselves, and we have to reflect a lot on our own journey and constantly be working on ourselves. That's just got to be part of it. At FCNL, we have a lot of work where we're trying to establish, we have a statement on anti-racism and anti-bias, and then we try to establish, okay, how do we put this into practice? We have a community agreement. How do we get agreement in the community that we're going to practice, in this way together? And how do we develop systems for harm repair and accountability that we practice? And it takes practice over and over and over again, and making it a habit to do this work.
Bridget, thank you so much. I think Francisco is going to share some final words with us.
It is a great pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight. And, you know, twice a week, I try to facilitate here a experience after worship on Wednesday and Saturday. I usually use the metaphor of dancing. It's not that we will dance now, but I wanted to say that my invitation to all of you that has been joining online and here in the barn is, let's continue dancing with what we hear tonight, because there is a lot to be observed, digest. You know, let's get nurtured by the learning that you have shared with us. And thank you so much. You know, I look forward to welcoming you back to the many activities of Pendle Hill. Visit our website, pendlehill.org. We will be turning to 93 on the 24th. Now, can you imagine, in the middle of the Great Depression, a group of friends and hope, is huge for us, decided that they needed a school for the prophet. And guess what? You are sitting in it. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. Stay in tune. And we look forward to welcoming you back to many other activities here at Pendle Hill. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And actually, I just wanted to ask you, so